Hello and welcome to Landscape Photography World, the podcast for everyone passionate about landscape photography. I'm Grant Swinburne and I'll be your host on this show, talking to landscape photographers about their motivations, likes and dislikes. In this episode, I'm joined by Stuart McGlennon, a lifelong resident of the UK's Lake District and dedicated landscape photographer, as he shares his intimate knowledge of the region's landscape. Stuart discusses his path into full-time photography, distinguishing personal and commercial work. We explore insights on educational platforms like YouTube, the challenges of running a photo gallery, and the importance of market understanding. We also discuss Stuart's preferences in subjects, his reflections on the future of photography in the AI era, and the creative impact of weather conditions. I hope you enjoy the show. G'day Stuart, welcome to Landscape Photography World. How are you going?
Not so bad, mate. Before we get going, we didn't discuss this before. I just want to draw attention to this jumper because people watching this will probably think, what the hell is he wearing? I actually class this as my studio, but it's basically a big basement area of the house and there's no central heating in here. And obviously with being winter in the UK, it's pretty nippy at the minute. So whenever I come down here, it's pretty cold. So this sort of sheep looking thing is the best thing I can find at the minute. So, but it's doing the job anyways.
As long as it does the job, I think it's a good look, mate.
It does, yeah. Yeah.
All right. So, what does photography mean to you? Where did the spark come from? What got you started?
What's it mean to me? I think initially, probably not so much now, but initially it was escapism. Now, I know that's probably not the most original answer, I would say, but it's very important to my situation in that I got started in photography almost by accident a little bit. I don't have a kind of storied background of 20 years of shooting film and everything. Mm-hmm. I came to photography pretty much by accident. I was going through quite a difficult period in my life about 8-9 years ago now, where I was in a pretty, I wouldn't say dead-end job, but a job that paid well but drove me mad and had very poor sort of work-life balance. And also, he's 11 now, but a young son at the time who was going through a diagnosis for autism. Mm-hmm. And I ended up stumbling into photography by chance a little bit, mainly as a escape route, because I started doing sort of mountain photography, mountain walking and hiking. And I just stumbled into taking pictures while I was on those hikes, which again isn't probably the most original answer, but it's how I ended up getting started. I only took up the hiking really as an alternative to doing sort of hobbies and activities that I'd done in the past. I grew up doing an awful lot of competitive sport to quite a high level, and anything creative wasn't ever really on the radar. So when I got into hiking, I wanted to do something that was just completely removed from anything competitive, and getting out on your own up the mountain seemed like the best way to that. So anyway, the photography kind of came as a bit of a byproduct of that. I started taking pictures on my phone and then progressed to getting a better camera, and very quickly decided that I wasn't, probably partly linked to doing a lot of competitive sport when I was younger, was that I was very quickly not happy with just taking snapshots of things. I wanted to actually see if I could improve these pictures. So yeah, I guess photography in the early part especially was escapism for me, and it still is to an extent, although obviously I do it full time as a job now. So the meaning of it has changed a little bit, but I would say at the root of it is escapism.
Okay. And you talked a little bit about that wanting to improve. Was that where you started to think about it as a form of artistic expression and something that you wanted to express yourself in, or was it still just trying to improve the quality of the image and the quality of the documentation of the environment that you were seeing?
Probably a bit of both. I think on a conscious level, the kind of just the nuts and bolts of learning it to take a decent picture was there. But I would say probably subconsciously, yeah. I think there was probably an artistic side of it that I perhaps wanted to get out. Certainly in them early days where, I definitely felt going out up into the hills and getting away from it all was, as I say, that escape element of it. And the taking pictures was probably my way of getting out some of the stress and some of the things that I was feeling at the time. So probably actively in my mind, not thinking about that, but I think on a subconscious level, yeah, definitely it was probably part of it, I think.
Yeah, okay. And what motivates you now? Obviously, turning it into your job, there's the financial aspect of it, but clearly there's an artistic motivation behind it. What is that? What does that look like for you?
I think I'm very fortunate in that I live in probably one of the most photogenic areas in the world, in the Lake District, and I have this abundance of beautiful landscapes on my doorstep. And I think going back to what I was saying about doing competitive sport when I was younger, I had all that on my doorstep, but I just completely neglected it. I had literally no interest in it at all. I actually used to make a little bit of a joke about it in that because I live in a sort of semi-rural area, to get to any of the major, I know this is a long-winded way of answering this, but to get to any of the major motorway networks, you have to drive about an hour and a half just to get out of the mountains, basically.
Yep.
And I used to joke that I wish they would just drill a tunnel through them like they do in Switzerland so you could get to the motorway quicker. But yeah, having all that on my doorstep and having just neglected it all my life, I guess now it's a case of wanting to just really embrace that and catch up with lost time a little bit in some way. So yeah, that continues to motivate me now, even with doing it as a job, in that I'm just, without wanting to get too romantic about it, fell in love with my local area all over again. And that's what keeps driving me forward with my photography is trying to find new takes, new angles, new areas of the Lake District that I've not done before. And it's a relatively small area, so even though on a map it looks quite tight and contained, there's so much still to explore with it. So yeah, I guess just falling in love with your local landscape probably drives me forward.
I guess having all of those iconic locations on your doorstep, do you ever get the feeling of wanting to bust out of that, or you mentioned that there's still plenty to explore? Is there any desire though to get out and about and do other things?
I think when I started, probably like a lot of landscape photographers, you see all these epic locations on social media and you want to go and explore them. And I did a little bit of that for a relatively short amount of time. I still do a bit of traveling now, but not a great deal for someone probably in my position. But if anything, it's actually probably gone the other way. I actually find my desire to go, if what you're asking is shooting different places, but my kind of desire to do that is actually even less now, because the more I visit some of those other places, I've just been to, usually in the winter, I go to Scotland sort of 2 or 3 times and run workshops up there. And
sure.
But every time I go there, I'm always reminded that unless you can, it's just my opinion, but unless you can really spend an awful lot of time there and immerse yourself into that landscape and get to know it intimately, it's very hard to build up a sort of really unique, compelling body of work. You end up inevitably going to the same places that everyone else does, even if you're trying to put your own spin on it or whatever.
Yeah.
And that really does nothing for me. It for the first sort of year or so of exploring landscapes and stuff, I was intrigued by some of that, but very quickly I cottoned on to it doesn't excite me at all. Whereas I've got this area that I'm based in the Lake District, which, as I said, is one of the best places you can photograph anywhere. And there's a lot of photographers that will give their right arm to be based where I am. So I almost in a weird kind of way. I almost feel a bit responsible that I should be spending most of my time there. And so, yeah, my motivation to just really immerse myself in the local landscape is probably stronger than ever, I would say.
Yeah, yeah. Having visited the Lake District myself, I think you're absolutely right. There's so many nooks and crannies that you can get into. And I think one of the things that I was interested in asking you about is, have you ever had any real difficulty finding unique compositions, given that there is literally so many places where you can stand and stick a tripod and get a shot?
No, I wouldn't. It gets inevitably it gets a little harder as time goes on because you cover more places,
Sure,
and
sure.
as photography gets more popular and with social media and everything now, places are getting a lot more footfall and all of that. But no, I think, to be honest with you, if you're willing to sort of get off your backside and just go and explore, there's plenty out there. You don't have to go all that far off the kind of beaten track, really, not just the Lake District, but anywhere to find something fairly unique. But it does require a level of graft that quite a lot of photographers often aren't willing to put in. But if you're like me and you're based in that place rather than having to drive to it constantly, then that obviously helps. So no, certainly don't struggle, I would say.
No, excellent. And where are you on the spectrum of hardcore planning to more spontaneity in your photography? Are you someone that spends hours and days poring over your ordnance survey maps to say, all right, if I take this trail, I'll end up there and I'll get this particular shot? Or are you more, okay, I'm out today, there's a path, let's follow it?
I'm probably somewhere in the middle of that, to be honest. I'm definitely not a massive planner. I think when I started, you would really go into a lot of detail of what this particular place is going to look like at this exact time and all of that. And
sure.
Very quickly I cottoned on to just, that's a very low percentage approach to photography, and it didn't really attract me at all. So I do a bit of planning I like to obviously know the basic things of where the light direction is going to be at a given time and all of that. But in terms of poring over maps and stuff, I'll use some things like Google Earth and bits and bobs to check out. If it's a walk out if it's a fairly big hike, I think it's common sense to put an element of that in. You don't want to completely waste your time walking out sort of 3-4 hours and finding nothing. So a bit of research helps. But I found, as time's gone on, I found that my images, certainly the quality of them, I think, has improved in just being more reactive to what's there rather than necessarily just having a big sort of structured plan around a shot. It's very rare that I go out with a set shot in mind. And if I do, it's usually because it's something that I actually need to sell in the gallery rather than it being my own work. So I'm not a big planner, I would say. It's just the sort of basics of light direction and rough terrain, but I like to just respond to what's in front of me more than anything else, I think.
Sorry, I was on mute there.
All right, sorry, I was going to say, I thought it was me.
For somebody that hasn't seen your work, how would you describe your style?
Style? I consciously don't try. I think it's probably the best way is to not try to have a style. I think if you do it long enough, you should. A style of your own should just come out and be there in your work anyway. But I guess my approach is more of the kind of eyewitness approach. I've often described it in the past as that I'm actually actively trying to get out of the way of the landscape a little bit. I do sometimes see, especially newer photographers coming into it, that they're very heavily influenced by social media and want to create a style for themselves. And it's very, I must fit in this box. And I think you should just let that evolve naturally. But for me, I just It's probably a bit of a boring answer, but if I like the look of it, then I'll respond to it. And
Yeah.
I don't really focus too much on the type of subject I'm photographing. It could be woodland, it could be a big mountain, whatever it is. It could be something close in. I like it all. I don't tend to focus on one area of landscape photography. So I pretty much photograph anything that interests me. But in terms of the style, I'm really trying to just let the landscape itself do the talking. I'm not trying to inject something into it. So I guess in that sense, probably more of just an eyewitness approach.
Yeah. Okay. Obviously, landscape photography is a very visual communication style. You also do quite a bit in your vlogging and so forth. How much of your success would you attribute to your ability to communicate well?
That's a good question. I've not been doing YouTube all that long. So YouTube's a sort of different thing on its own, but I have a lot of experience in past things in my life. I've done a lot of sports coaching growing up and going through university, and I've been exposed to a lot of different types of communicators and that sort of thing. So I feel like I'm pretty well rounded in that sense. When it comes to actually getting that across, I like to think anyway, I do that pretty well. A huge part, it's probably veering off into a different conversation, but running workshops, especially, communication's a huge part of it. And if you can be the best photographer in the world, but if you can't communicate what's in your head and get that across to someone in simple terms, then you're going to fail. Communicate, I think it's a big part of it, yeah. But also the visual element of it as well. Your images should communicate something, even if it's a subconscious thing. But yeah, big part of it in YouTube, going off in that direction. I've not been doing YouTube all that long, to be honest, but I've certainly found the transition into doing that a little easier than I thought I would. But I think some of the things that I've done in the past with comfortable on a camera and talking to people and getting an idea across, I think that certainly helps.
Yeah, definitely. I want to explore the venture into YouTube. How did that start? What sparked your desire to get into that?
I need to think out how I can answer this diplomatically.
Have to be diplomatic. It's just you and I. Maybe a couple of hundred other people.
Yeah. Listen, I'll be honest with you. I was probably one of those photographers that for a long time knocked YouTube a little bit. And it's got its flaws. It does have a lot of flaws, and there's quite a lot of things I don't like about YouTube. But purely from a pragmatic, hard-nosed business perspective, I think if you're trying to run a landscape photography business in 2023 or 2024 now, should I say, if you're not embracing YouTube or some sort of video in some form, I think it's almost probably a bit negligent. And I could see what's been coming with YouTube for a long time, and I think I've probably missed the sort of the big wave of it that happened years ago. So in that sense, the kind of the money train on YouTube has probably left me a long time ago. But I think you need to be yeah. But I think if you're doing it full time, I think you need to be on here, to be honest. And it's not for everyone. I know a lot of absolutely first class photographers that probably will never be interested in doing YouTube, or probably wouldn't do it very well because they can't communicate on a camera. And for me, my motivation was mainly business orientated, to be honest. I think I'm being honest here in saying that if I didn't do landscape photography full time, I doubt I would do YouTube. Because as fun as the videos are to do sometimes, I don't particularly get enjoyment from the video aspect of it. The photographer. If you watch any of my videos, you've probably picked up on it's very photography centric. I'm not trying to put myself in the video and make it about me. I'm trying to, a bit like the pictures, I'm trying to sort of get out of the way of it. Bluntly, business, I think it's just the way the world is now. It's not just photography, it's everything. If you're not embracing some element of video in your business, you're potentially missing out on quite a big audience. And the younger generation of landscape photographers coming up behind us now have grown up with YouTube. This is where they come to now for all the information. So yeah, it's driven by, I would say.
Yeah. It's certainly where I learnt a lot of my photography, the digital photography, and certainly editing. Most of my editing comes from, I did have a little bit of a background with some web development, which meant that you got into a little bit of Photoshop to play around with some graphics just so they scaled correctly and all that sort of thing. But yeah, I learnt most of my photography skills, I think, from YouTube. And I've always said on this podcast, it's like a university. You can pretty much learn anything you want now.
Oh yeah, it's as a resource. I think it's fantastic, and that side of it, I've always said whenever anyone's asked my opinion on it, I think as a go-to resource for anyone start at whatever level, to be honest. But there's pretty much anything that you want to find out, it's there pretty much, isn't it? And
it's sorting the wheat from the chaff, so a little bit there, but
yeah, and that's one of the flaws of it, isn't it? But you've just got to let hopefully the audience will do that.
So I obviously want to get into the business side of things, but before I do that, I'm interested a little bit more about the work that you've done to build up that set of skills. We just talked about using YouTube as a learning resource. What other learning resources have you used to bolster your skill set?
I mean, for YouTube, I never used YouTube from a learning perspective. So, listen, we're all learning at every level, but I certainly didn't use any of YouTube for that. I built up to a point where I could go full time long before kind of YouTube or anything like that. So my kind of entry into landscape photography and learning was more, I guess, probably a bit old school now, but I was part of a couple of photography forums in this country that sadly now, with the advent of things like YouTube and stuff, they've died to death a little bit. But even in the relatively short amount of time, and we're only talking like 6-7 years here, but the ways you learn now, starting out in landscape photography, completely changed, because we're saying about YouTube there. I used those forums quite a lot for kind of feedback and interaction from people, and the kind of I don't know what it's like over there for you, but in the UK, the kind of landscape photography community was very different back then as well. So if you were an aspiring photographer and you wanted to learn, there was, I think it would be fair to say back then, people were a lot more open-minded about giving advice and critique and all of that sort of thing. But it was an environment where people could learn together, whereas now it feels like everyone's their own little island and everyone's off doing their own thing, and then you've got YouTube and people learn on their own now. But yeah, for me, I used forums quite a lot when I started, and I would post on there. And there was one forum in particular I used called Talk Photography.
Okay.
And there was a dedicated critique section in there, and you had quite a lot of really well-regarded, highly skilled landscape photographers that would contribute on there, and it was absolutely brilliant learning resource that today you just, in this country anyway, there isn't anything like that anymore. I mean, I guess the closest thing you've probably got is maybe things like closed Facebook groups or something like that. I don't know. Right. But I would use those a lot, and then I went on 2 or 3 workshops when I got started as well, and they were great. Workshops sometimes can get a bit of a bad rep with people, but I'd certainly recommend people going on workshops. And as good a resource as YouTube is, there's nothing better than actually having the hands-on feedback of a tutor standing on your shoulder looking at what you're doing. So workshops were definitely a big part of it as well for me, I think.
Yeah. You mentioned the decision to get into full time, what, I guess, did you put in place to make sure that you were okay when you got started and you had a financial buffer and so forth to make sure that you were okay when you kicked off? And how difficult was it to make that decision to go full time?
Honestly, I didn't have a financial buffer.
Oh, okay. That's
No,
ballsy.
yeah, I get that a lot. People say, "Oh, you're brave for doing that," but I'll be honest with you. I was at a point in my life where I was absolutely miserable with where I was working. I was getting paid well enough, but I was just in an absolutely miserable job.
Sure.
And then combined with uh, what was going on with my son at the time, I think I was just at a point where I was ready to change for anything basically. But the move into photography ended up coming by chance because the gallery that I own now, under the previous owner, I was a contributing artist. So I'd
Right.
work in there.
Okay.
And when I would go through to drop new work off with him, I'd often be moaning away to him about how life sucked in my job and everything, the usual sort of stuff. And so anyway, he must have taken a lot of that in because when he decided to, his family circumstances changed quite quickly. I think his mother took ill or something and he had to move back to Manchester basically. But I got a phone call out of nowhere from him basically saying, "Do you want to take over running the shop?" And I thought he was joking at first, to be honest. But anyway, he floated this idea to me and I thought about it. And the more I thought about it, I thought, this makes actually a lot of sense because
Okay.
I don't like where I'm working. I can basically, as long as I've got enough faith in the quality of my work and I can sell it, you've got a ready-made business there in a tourist town that gets an awful lot of footfall. So in that sense, it made a lot of sense and it just came at the perfect time for me. I was very fortunate in that sense, in that just a lot of things had to align for me to do that. The only decision I had to make was could I get over the fact that there wasn't a lot of security in it? You know, if things did go tits up basically and I didn't sell enough work or whatever,
Yeah.
then I would have to, revert to something else. But I think I was just at a point in my life where I was if that hadn't come up, I'd have probably moved into another job somewhere else anyway. But in terms of like the financial side of it, didn't really have any kind of insurance policy, shall we say. So,
Okay.
it was
Fair
just
enough.
a leap of faith.
So when you got started, how did you get over that thinking about, okay, I don't have a parachute on. I've just jumped out of the plane. What do I do now?
I guess part of my character is that I'm pretty good at not worrying about things that I can't control.
Sure.
And for something like that, stress too much about that. I just got on with the task of just, if I produce good quality work and I do it regularly enough, that should be enough to make this. The model of the business was already there. It was just a case of just continuing it. So in that sense, I didn't worry too much. But the kind of learning how to run, well, it's not just specific to photography, it's any self-employed business that there's no kind of manual for you to follow. You just, you just get on with it and figure it out as you go along. And I think I'm still figuring that out, to be honest with you. I'm nearly six years down the line now, but yeah, there's no kind of manual or guide to it. You've just got to figure it out and see what happens.
One of the things a lot of people that run their own business, we've talked about previously, is the wearing of all of the hats that you've got to wear. Not only are you the photographer and producer of the work, I'm not sure if you do your own printing or not, but you could be your printer, you could be you're definitely your chief marketing officer, you're the chief financial officer, et cetera, et cetera. How do you balance everything and how do you wear all the hats, and what sort of percentage of time is business and admin versus getting out and doing what you really love to do?
I need to improve on the marketing front. I've got probably a bit of an old school mentality, and it's maybe a bit naive in the modern world, to be honest, but I desperately want just the work to do the talking for me. And if I can fit marketing and promotion and whatever around that, then I will. And I can do that now. But I think going forward, the kind of the marketing and all of that, and YouTube's kind of part of that because it's very visual, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
Yeah, I probably need to dedicate more time to that. But I guess the flip side to that is that I like to think the photography focused approach that I have, that perhaps maybe some people in my position maybe don't do enough, is maybe one of my selling points. I don't know. But kind of a balancing act, really. I think there's definitely room for me to probably focus more on the marketing, but it's definitely a sort of task to juggle all them different things. I'm probably not the most organized person, but I've had to learn it. If you're not organized and you're running your own business, then you're going to run into problems pretty quickly, as I've found out a few times over the years. But yeah, it's tough. I think for a lot of people who have designs on maybe going full time with landscape photography or any photography, there's a lot of that to it that I think people won't be aware of and don't appreciate just how much time goes into that.
What do you think is the most important thing you've learned through running the gallery and running the business as well? Because it's not just the gallery, there's also the workshops as well.
The gallery's an easy one, actually. The thing that I've learned over the years, which is overwhelmingly the most important thing, is not to get too emotionally invested in your own work and understand that you need to understand what your marketplace is. I operate a gallery in a tourist town where probably 95% of the people who come through the doors have no interest in landscape photography at all, other than they want to take a nice picture home with them.
Yep. So
they're not looking at photography the same way we are. And the mistake I made starting out, which was an obvious one, and in hindsight I should have clicked on to quicker, was that the photography that you love to shoot personally doesn't always translate into sales. It quite often doesn't.
Yeah.
And you've got to let that go a little bit. And if you ever end up coming into my gallery, you'll probably see a lot of work that I don't actually put on social media a lot of the time because it's not stuff I personally like all that much. But I know it's going to sell.
Yeah, right.
So that's but that's probably more specific to running a gallery on its own. There's many different ways you can be a full-time landscape photographer. Mine is based around the gallery. But yeah, that's the overwhelming thing with the shop. With workshops and stuff, the biggest thing I've learned with those is that not everyone who comes on, I think you were referring to workshops specifically, not everyone who comes on workshops is there for learning. And I made the mistake early on of thinking that everyone's just here to come and learn, and they want to see your approach, or they want to learn a particular type of an approach to shooting or whatever. But the reality is that quite often people just want to come to a place, be shown some nice locations, take some pictures and go home, which I find completely alien, to be honest, because I much prefer having clients who come to learn, because that's why you're doing it. But I've had many workshops over the years where people literally just want to be shown some nice places and just left to their own devices a little bit.
Yeah.
So now when I do workshops, I'll always make a point, either through consultation emails or when I speak to them in person, is really ask them, what do you want to get out of the day? Because you'll get a lot of people with a funny look on their face sometimes, and they'll look at you and go, "Oh, I'm here to learn." And I'm like, yeah, but I actually want to check that, because I don't want to assume that and then take you on a really intensive learning day and find that the guy only wanted to just go and shoot some nice pretty
It's also worthwhile knowing what they want to learn, because They may be an intermediate or even an advanced shooter, and what they're looking for is advice on composition or something like that. Whereas somebody that's a beginner is obviously going to want to start at the very beginning of, okay, how am I working my camera and making sure that bit works before I get into the less technical, more artistic side of things.
Yeah, absolutely. But the most fun I have on workshops is definitely with beginners, because one thing that you learn over the years is that you should never be closed off to different approaches. I've seen some absolute rank beginners who they'll see something that you haven't seen. And
exactly.
You'll go,
yep.
You know what I mean? I didn't think about it that way. And that's when you see that, it's absolutely brilliant. So yeah, I really enjoy it.
I love learning from people that I'm trying to teach something to.
Yeah, that's it. But there's a technical side to photography that you have to learn, but it's artistic. It's a collaborative thing often, and yeah, if you can get a bit of that going both ways, then great.
Very much. You mentioned the I don't want to call it an issue, but that conflict between the stuff you like shooting versus the stuff you know is going to sell. How do you maintain that sort of creative vision whilst also catering to those more commercial side of things? Are you surprised by some of the images that sell commercially versus the ones that don't?
I'm less surprised now. I think people are, after a while, I mean, as I said, I've been doing this in that shop now for nearly 6 years, and yeah, most people who are invested in landscape photography are fairly easy to understand in that respect. But for my own sanity, really, I kind of I like to try when I go out shooting to either have a plan to go out and shoot specifically stuff for the gallery, or I'm just going out to shoot for myself.
Sure.
I find if I don't separate them, and I end up on a shoot where the conditions are really good, and then I'm thinking, oh, I actually really need to be thinking about getting a shot for the gallery. I end up with a little bit of cluttered thinking. So I try where I can to separate the two. A good example is the sort of shooting I've been doing recently, where it's very winter based and cold images and stuff with ice and snow and all that sort of thing. Those images traditionally don't sell well. So I just make my peace with that, and knowing when I go out, I don't have any pressure of shooting with a commercial kind of head on. And I can be a lot more responsive to what I'm shooting. Whereas if it's stuff that I know I'm going to go out and shoot for the gallery, that's when we're talking about planning and stuff before. That's where I do have a more sort of planned, structured approach, because I know that I just need to get this one particular shot because I know it's going to sell. So I just try and when I go out, I just try and separate the two. Basically, I don't try and let them overlap too much. The best thing is when you get an image that you love yourself and it sells. That's
absolutely. That's a bonus. Yeah.
But what I've found over the years is that happens pretty infrequently, to be honest. And you've just got to make your peace with that and just be okay with it, I think.
Yeah, fair enough. One of the things a lot of landscape photographers in particular, but photographers in general, struggle with is pricing. How do you price your work? Do you have a formula that you work to, or is it more put a finger up in the air and see which way the wind's blowing?
I'd say more formula, but this is where it goes back to really understanding your market.
Yeah.
For where I guess I would class myself and the level I'm at, I really don't price. I'd say I don't. It's a conscious decision, but I don't price my work at the same rate as, say, people I would consider peers, just simply because that's not the market I'm selling to. This is probably something that, a lot of landscape photographers aren't really that affected by, because they're not running a gallery. But if I wasn't running a gallery, I'd be pricing my work far higher. in line with probably where it should be. But the market that I'm selling to, as I say, don't have any kind of interest in landscape photography. They don't know what elite level photography is versus something
they're buying a memory.
Yeah, exactly. They don't the level of appreciation and it just isn't there, and that's totally fine. So I have to really heavily factor that in, and the pricing of my work, if I'm being brutally honest, is far lower than it should be. But I know that if I went in and started pricing at the rate that I think it should be alongside my peers, I wouldn't sell anything, because people who aren't invested in landscape photography, in my experience, aren't willing to pay those prices. And I don't know if that's a cult. What I've noticed over the years, and this is, as I say, specific to galleries, is that in the UK, I feel there's a real under appreciation of landscape photography. I get a lot of American customers coming in the shop each summer, and they can't believe how low the prices are for some of this stuff. They'll happily pay a lot more money over there, whereas over here in the UK, people look down the nose a little bit at photography. And that's where a lot of landscape photographers, because they're not exposed to that direct feedback from Joe Blogs on the street, they look at their own work in a bubble a little bit. And whereas I'm seeing the actual reality of what people actually think of landscape photography a lot of the time. So I have to factor that in heavily in my pricing. But I mean, when I first started out, I think I'd done a bit of research into some of this, and they always say roughly you should look to, I think it's either triple or quadruple whatever your unit costs are, basically. That's a fairly rough method to price. I don't go off that specifically, but I think when I started, I used that as a base, and I just went from there. But there's definitely, for me, within the marketplace that I'm selling in, like a ceiling that unfortunately is a bit of a negative of running a gallery in a tourist town, is that you're always going to be a little bit hamstrung by the location and the kind of your customers.
Yeah, who's passing through.
Yeah.
One of the things I'm really interested in is places that you keep getting called back to. Is there anything in your local area, or could be elsewhere, that you've got unfinished business with? You just keep going back to that location for a reason, and what is that reason is the question.
When I started landscape photography, I really heavily photographed an area called Wasdale and Eskdale, which are two neighbouring valleys in the Lake District, and they're very close to where I live. They're only about sort of 10-15 minute drive, but they're really quite spectacular landscapes. So the Lake District, you've been yourself to the Lake District, and it's, they're not the biggest mountains by any stretch, but the Wasdale and Eskdale area is more like what you'll see in, say, the Scottish Highlands. It's a bit more rugged and a bit more dramatic. And I really, when I started, focused heavily on that area, firstly because it was close to home, but secondly because even though it's a spectacular landscape, it's actually quite, I wouldn't say, it's under photographed, I would say, for visiting photographers, because when they come to the Lake District, they tend to focus on some of the more popular places. So I really learned what I was doing shooting that area, which was fantastic for me because I had this amazing place close to home, but also a lot of photographers weren't photographing it. So it was quite easy. Right. It was quite easy for me getting started to almost mark myself out a little bit from other photographers, because I was producing a lot of unique work that a lot of people probably haven't seen before. The problem I have with that area now, though, is that because I've obviously got this gallery, when I opened the gallery, I had to then cater a lot of my work to the immediate area around the shop.
Yep.
So I've stepped away from shooting that area, even though it's only 10 minutes from my house, because it doesn't sell as well in the shop. But now, 5-6 years on, I feel like I've built enough of a portfolio around that area around the gallery in the sort of Keswick Derwentwater area, that I can go back to shooting my local area a bit more now. So that kind of area, I'm really motivated over the next sort of 18 months because I've got a book in the pipeline as well, and I want to get a few more images for the book from that area, because a lot of my best stuff, even though I really enjoy still looking at it and really proud of shooting those images, they were shot quite a few years ago now.
Yeah.
So I do feel that local area immediately to me around Wasdale and Eskdale is an area I've got a bit of unfinished business with, I would say. So yeah, probably there.
Do you think the areas that you do shoot has influenced how you shoot in any way?
Yeah. That area initially, because it's a very rugged landscape, and it's actually quite close to the coast, so you're only 10 minutes drive from the sea there. So it's very influenced by the coastal weather that comes in and then hits the mountains, and it's got its own little sort of microclimate a little bit. So I was very drawn initially to shooting more changeable weather, dare I say miserable weather, to be honest with you. But I really enjoyed the challenge of trying to create unique images in what you would normally class as kind of subpar conditions, because ultimately that's not just the Lake District, but most places is that the reality is 90% of the time you are going to get suboptimal conditions. It's what you can do with them that kind of will mark you out. So yeah, I guess my sort of preferred style or conditions to shoot in would definitely influence by the area immediately around the shop, the sort of Derwentwater area around Keswick. It's a much prettier landscape. It's a lot gentler. It requires a different approach. It suits more serene type imagery, which are nice, but they don't do an awful lot for me. So going back to what we're saying about shooting for the gallery and shooting for yourself, when I shoot that area, I'm often shooting images that often don't resonate with me an awful lot, to be honest. I much prefer being out in the sort of mucky, changeable, stormy weather that's closer to home.
Which most people don't want to buy and stick on their wall.
No, exactly. Yeah, I'd say if I had to guess, probably of my top, what I class as like the sort of top 10 images I've ever taken, I'd say probably only one of them sells in any great number. And most of the best work I've produced over the past sort of 2 or 3 years, hardly any of it sells. I don't got to the point now, to be honest with you, that I'm not probably painting a positive picture of selling work in a gallery, but I don't even attempt putting it on the walls now, which is a shame, because I just know that it's not going to sell to that market. I have them on the website, obviously, and people can order through that. But yeah, two very different things.
Yeah, absolutely. What's your most memorable experience whilst out shooting?
Most memorable? I'd say I took a shot of some fell ponies, wild pony. I think they're wild ponies, up on, keep calling them fells. We're called fells around here, but mountains, on a place called Great Mel Fell in the Lake District, which is an area that's at fairly high elevation. It's 500-600 meters up, and it's very susceptible to snow. It's a bit of my last video that I've just put out is from there, but it's very susceptible to snow. And I went up there almost by chance a little bit, to be honest, because I was on my way to the printers to pick up a big acrylic print. And as I was driving over there was a lot of snow coming down. I thought, well, I'm passing Great Mel Fell. I'll just chance it and see what happens, basically. Yep. Anyway, I went up there in the snow, and I timed it absolutely perfectly, because I got the car in just before the really heavy snow came down. And then when I got up onto the fell, it was, really coming down, this snow. And anyway, I got this shot of these fell ponies that I think there's a group of maybe 6 or 7 of them, and they're very photogenic, pure white, these ponies. And they tend to go around in groups of 2 or 3, but rarely will you see them all together.
Mm-hmm.
And anyway, I got this shot of them all huddled under this set of trees. It's probably more like a wildlife picture than a landscape traditionally. But anyway, I got this picture of them all huddled under the trees, taking shelter from the blizzard.
Sure.
And yes, that's what I was saying before about just reacting to what's in front of you. I'm not precious about whether it's a landscape or I don't take pictures of animals that often, but if they work in a picture, then, happy
absolutely
to shoot. So, anyway, I got this really, I guess it's a unique picture of these ponies lined up underneath the trees, taking shelter from the blizzard.
Sure.
And I must have sat there for about, 45 minutes, an hour, waiting for them to kind of line up properly, because every time you would get 2 or 3 of them stood apart from each other, you get the other 2 kind of hiding.
Yeah.
So I thought, if I can just get them all spaced out evenly, this will make a good shot. So anyway, the experience of taking that, I mean, whether I got a picture or not, that will live long in the memory. Just the kind of, I'm not one for going in, for getting all arty-farty about stuff, but yeah, that moment of just total peace and, I guess, tranquility, or whatever you want to call it, was something else. And it was the upside to doing YouTube now, is that those moments, you can get them on video and you've got a record of them. So I did a video on that. It was back in February 21, I think.
Yeah, I think I saw it a while back.
Yeah, so it's on there, and I can go back and look at it in future. When I'm too old and rickety to do any of this anymore, I'll have that memory now and rewatch it. So yeah, probably that, I would say. Although I've got a video out next week where we had some conditions up in Assynt in northern Scotland, where the conditions ran that pretty close, to be honest. The light was just like nothing I've seen before, to be honest. And it's very hard to get that across in video sometimes.
Yeah.
So yeah, probably that one, I would say.
Yeah, sounds wonderful. What about horror stories? Have you had any dramas?
Horror stories? Okay, I'll try and... I wasn't going to say this, but I don't think the guy who involves in this would be watching this. I had one interesting workshop once, which I wouldn't say a nightmare, but it was just absolutely bizarre. I had a workshop with a guy where he'd basically got me booked to take him to set locations, a bit like what we're saying about he wasn't there for the learning, he was just there for just wanting to be taken to some nice places. So anyway, it was him and his partner, and he was really specific about wanting to go to this specific location. I was like, yeah, it's no problem, I'll take you there. Anyway, I goes to this location, and there's it's quite a popular location, this, I won't say which one, but there was another photographer there, and this photographer had actually recognized me from doing these YouTube videos. So it's always a bit weird now, but he says, hi, how are you doing? Oh, watch your videos. I said, oh, great, cheers, mate. How are you doing? Anyway, so I got chatting to this guy, and I've got these 2 on the workshop with me. And he says, oh, you're doing a workshop? I said, yeah, I don't want to get in your way or anything. And he was like, oh, no, because it's quite a tight space, this location where you're shooting at. So anyway, I'm having a chat to this guy, and my 2 workshop clients are just sort of getting set up and everything. And anyway, there were a couple, and this one guy is working on a composition. We're talking through it, and this, that, and the other. And he looks to me and he says, this is where the magic happens. And I thought, what? Little did I know, his partner had gone off into the trees. It's the most bizarre thing. Partner had gone off into the trees, and she started stripping off.
Okay.
And I was thinking, what? And he's going, yes, this is where and I'm like, what on earth have I got myself into here? His partner had gone off into the trees, started stripping off. She comes out from behind these trees in like this what could only be described as lingerie, basically. It was like a sort of nightgown lingerie type. Anyway, so she comes out and she starts clambering across these like mossy rock. They're quite slippy.
Yeah.
She starts clambering out. And I'm like, what the hell's going on? This guy had booked me for a half day just so he could be taken to this location, so he could do his own impromptu glamour shoot or something. So he's, and then of course I've got the other complication of this other guy who's already here, and obviously you know what it's like in that if someone's there first, you don't want to encroach on their space.
Absolutely,
you wait. It's good etiquette to let them finish before you move in or anything like that. So this other guy who I've been having a nice conversation with about doing the YouTube videos and stuff, and he looks at me and he's got this look on his face of, what kind of workshop are you running in?
Is this what all your workshops are like, Stuart?
Yeah, exactly. So I'm sort of mortified, and I'm like, what on earth is going on? So I looks to the other guy while so the client is setting up his composition, and I looks at the other guy and I go to him, I sort of whisper to him, I'm like, I have nothing to do with this. I had no idea this. So I said, because yeah, like you say, he's looking at me thinking, what kind of workshops does he run? So anyway, so they went off doing this like basically impromptu glamour shoot. Yeah. And I had no idea about this at all. So anyway, this guy completely ran through this like it was the most normal thing in the world, and he didn't seem to have any concept of how like inappropriate it was or anything. Wow. It was just, oh, this is what we do. So anyway, as I'm walking back away from it, it's probably stopped short of saying I lost my temper with him, but I had to have a pretty stern word with him, and I said, look, I didn't appreciate that. And he was like, what do you mean? I said I don't run workshops like that. If you told me you were going to do that, I'd have said no immediately. But also, I said, you had another person there that you weren't considering. I said, you probably completely spoiled his enjoyment of the shoot. And it was all, I look back at it and think, oh, it was a funny thing, but it wasn't that pleasant at the time, to be honest. It was all a bit weird. Yeah, really awkward, yeah. And certainly not something I would have agreed to. So up until
I'm
that
definitely
point,
going to book a workshop with you.
Yeah. So
no,
yeah,
I don't think my wife would be climbing out on the rocks though.
No, I felt sorry for this woman a little bit because she almost looked like she'd been almost coerced into it a little bit, which is a bit made it even weirder because I looked at it and thought she's not really comfortable with this. Yeah. But yeah, it was a very bizarre situation, to be honest. Wow. Up until that point, I don't think I'd really had any sort of nightmares or anything in my photography, but that one stands out a mile.
That's definitely a beauty.
Yeah. So probably that.
So what has the practice of photography taught you about nature?
Yeah, that's a bloody difficult question. What's it taught me? From my own perspective, it's taught me an awful lot about patience. But nature, I think if you're not invested in photography and you've no interest in it, for years I played an awful lot of golf in my life, and I'm very fortunate. I've got back into playing golf now, actually, and been very fortunate in playing on a golf course that's very photogenic and there's some beautiful landscapes around it. And I would have spent so much time on that golf course with my eyes closed, not to what's around me and not taking any of it in it, and it can just completely, it can completely pass you by. And until taking up photography, that was definitely the case for me. I just no idea about what nature's capable of, and some of the things I saw in Scotland last week with the conditions are just, I think the biggest thing I've learned is it just never ceases to surprise you. You feel like, even doing what I do now, being out constantly in it, you get to a point sometimes where you feel like you've almost seen it all, which is not a good place to be, obviously, and I certainly don't think that. But you can sometimes feel like you're doing things on repeat a little bit. But every now and again, something like the conditions that we had in Scotland last week, just the quality of the light, and it's clear in the video, but we had a 2 or 3 day period there where it was almost like, I don't shoot infrared, but it was almost like walking into a landscape that had just had an infrared filter put across it.
Wow.
And just the most bizarre color palette that I've ever seen. And I just spent 2 or 3 days just open mouth, and it was a good reminder that it never ceases to amaze you. There's always something changing with it. I guess that's the biggest thing for me, is that it's always changing. There's always something different to see, I think.
Awesome. Have you ever hit a creative wall or a creative block? And if so, how did you handle it? And have you got any strategies or tips for people that get into that creative rut where they just don't feel it anymore?
Yeah, I think so. I think I've definitely had that a few times. I'm pretty fortunate in that I don't, even though I do it for a living now, I don't get too bogged down in. You'll see a lot of photographers who have this kind of almost compulsion to just be shooting all the time.
Yeah.
I'm fortunate in that I've never really had that. I'm quite happy to put the camera down and just take a break if I need to. If I'm not feeling particularly inspired, there's always another day, there's always another sunrise. Having a healthy perspective helps. I think sometimes it's hard to get that perspective, and that only really comes with experience, I think. So that's definitely helped. But yeah, taking regular breaks, and also just don't be frightened to. It's an easy thing to say, be inspired by other people, but you'll get a lot of photographers who are quite inward looking, in that they don't seek out other types of photography to take in. Pick up a book, go to an exhibition, anything to freshen it up. I get a huge amount of inspiration and happiness from looking at other people's work and seeing how diverse it is. We're fortunate now, we live in an age with social media that there's always inspiration out there, I think. I think you've just got to be open and receptive to it. So yeah, I kind of take quite a relaxed approach with it, to be honest. I think it's easy sometimes to get a bit tunnel vision with your photography and not be open to some of those things. Yeah, healthy dose of perspective, and I think taking the odd break now and again, and it should come to you. You shouldn't have to fight it too much, I think. I always feel like I do my best photography when I let it come to me rather than the other way.
Yeah, I totally agree. Forcing it, I don't think helps get through the block in any way, shape or form. You're better off waiting until the feeling's there and off you go.
Yeah, exactly.
What do you see as the future of photography, and what do you see as its biggest challenge facing photographers right now?
There's an awful lot of chatter at the minute, isn't there, about AI? I'm less worried about that, I think, than a lot of people I see. I think the biggest challenge for photography is going to be continuing to show its value and merit, and there's ways you can do that. I think doing things like YouTube certainly helps in being able to, I don't know how to put it, but prove that it's real almost. I think the AI thing isn't that big of a deal to landscape photography. I think it's going to have quite a dramatic effect on other genres of photography.
Yeah, totally agree.
Product photography, stuff like that, that's a bit more staged and easy to replicate. For people who like landscape photography, I don't think AI is going to be all that big of a threat to it. What was the other part of your question? To the sort of future
where do you see the future of photography going?
It's a tough one at the minute, because there's someone who kind of works at the sharp end of it with what I'm seeing with people's attitudes towards photography. It is, without wanting to sound too negative, it is diminishing a little bit in value, photography. You've only got to look at how tech is moving and making everything easier to produce these images. But I don't worry about a lot of that too much. I think photography for years has been built very much on a framework of it being a technical exercise, and there was a lot of barriers to people producing photography because of those technical things. The days of shooting film and everything, you had to have resources and money to buy those things before you could even get a ticket to doing photography, whereas all that's been removed now. And I think for a lot of people who are focused on the technical aspects of it, they're going to probably struggle because those barriers to creativity have gone. It should now be just about taking the pictures. The technical stuff to a large extent has been removed, and I actually don't mind that. I think what will happen is that the really top-notch creative work will rise. Yeah. And I think a lot of the mundane stuff that pretty much everyone can now produce because the technical barriers have been removed, I think a lot of that will fall by the wayside. But that will be, I think, a good thing in the long run because it will push people to produce better work. There's so many people now doing it and doing it to a high standard that I don't think that can be a bad thing, really. But yeah, photography as a whole, I think it's a pretty big subject, but it's a struggle, I think, to keep proving its value to a more casual audience.
Yeah, definitely. I totally agree with you there. And what do you like to do when you're not out shooting?
I said I used to play a lot of golf. I stopped playing golf round about the time that I actually got into the photography, because part of the reason I stopped was through the issues with my son and his autism, in that it took up an awful lot of time in the early years with him. His needs are quite complex. And as he's gotten a bit older now and things are getting a little easier on that front, I've only in the last few months actually gone back to playing golf now. So I'm really looking forward to the summer over here and getting back into that. So from my photography, a lot of landscape photographers tend to put the camera down a bit in the summer anyway. But I'll be really into the golf. So I don't think a lot of photography will be getting done during that time. Yeah, golf, I would say, in the immediate future, but just the usual stuff, to be honest. I don't, as I say, I don't mind putting the camera down every now and again, and I've got a young family here and plenty to keep me occupied. Yeah, just the usual stuff.
Fantastic. Are there any photographers that you think I should be talking to on the podcast?
Oh, knowing that he likes talking, I'd say Mark. I'd probably, if you haven't done him, I'd say Mark Littlejohn.
I haven't had Mark on.
No, if you had I don't know if anyone suggested him to you or not, but
Mark, I believe somebody did a few episodes ago.
Yeah, Mark, I run workshop tours with Mark, and he's absolutely fantastic photographer, but he's also got a very kind of unique kind of take on photography and his own approach and stuff, where he loves a chat. I'd say probably Mark off the top of my head. I'm trying to think who else. There's so many, isn't there? But he'd be a good one, I think.
Fantastic. All right. Thank you. I've got one more question for you, and for many of my listeners, it's the most important one I ask. Do you like pineapple on pizza?
Absolutely not. No, I don't get that at all. I think my missus likes pineapple on pizza, but oh God, no, absolutely not. No, can't think of anything worse.
No Hawaiian for Stuart then.
No, definitely not.
Fair enough. All right, well, it's been wonderful catching up with you tonight, or today, your time. Where can people find your work?
So the easiest place these days is probably if you go on YouTube and just search Stuart McGlennon. I'm on there. I've got a channel. My website is lensdistrict.com.
Mm-hmm.
My gallery, in case it's called Lens District Gallery. So yeah, lensdistrict.com. If you see me on Instagram, I'm just Stuart McGlennon on Instagram. I post quite a lot on Twitter as well, actually. If Twitter's a bit of a funny one, because I talk to quite a few landscape photographers who don't actually use Twitter that much. It's called X now, isn't it? But certainly in the UK anyway, for a long time, there was quite a thriving sort of community of landscape photographers on X. So yeah, I'm quite active on there. Like, I think my handle's at Lens District on there as well. So
Perfect. All right. Thanks very much, Stuart. Great chatting to you.
yeah, no worries, mate. Enjoyed it.
Lovely. Thanks again for listening to Landscape Photography World. I hope you enjoyed the show, and keep listening because I'll be joined by some great guests in upcoming episodes. You can find my work in this podcast at grantswinburnephotography.com. I'm also on Vero, Twitter, YouTube, Instagram, Threads, and Facebook. I'm Grant Swinburne. Hope to see you out shooting soon.